Hey guys, Jerry, the poor historian. This is the third time I'm recording this video because I have a new wireless microphone to improve the sound quality over the atrocious last one. And unfortunately, this is not the highest quality microphone. So every time I got excited about a topic during the last recording, it kind of capped out and buzzed at you, and I didn't really like that. So thought I'd record it again with it a little bit farther away from my mouth. We'll see if it works out well. In any case, welcome back. You are all here likely because you want to take your first steps into the world of researching and practicing historical Japanese sword fighting. And I am here to lay the groundwork of 3 or 4, if I remember to get to the fourth, I guess you'd say preliminary ideas, mindsets, or recommendations that you guys should have before going in and researching historical Japanese sword fighting. And I do want to warn you, one of them, the first one, might be, I suppose you'd say it might be upsetting to some people, especially those of you who have done, who are fans of Japanese history or samurai, who don't have professional researching, or at the same time, those of you who are practitioners of a traditional Japanese sword art like kendo or kenjutsu or iaido or koryu. And I assure you guys, my goal is not to insult or offend anyone or poo-poo their experiences. So please allow me, as I get to it, please allow me to explain why I'm saying the thing that I'm saying, to hopefully not, to hopefully explain why something might be downplayed in one way or another. So, cool. Let's start things off. I'm going to give you the absolute first recommendation that I have for you, and that is when you are beginning your research into historical Japanese sword fighting, please come into it with a completely clean slate. Some of you might be coming into this with your own pre-existing ideas on Japanese history or samurai culture. Some of you might be coming into it with experience in Japanese sword arts, and some of you might be coming into it with experience in one of the Western styles of weapons that are popular with HEMA, like longsword or saber. And I am going to recommend that you leave all of those aside because they are not associated with what we are trying to do by recreating historical Japanese sword fighting from the Warring States period. So just to tackle each one of those, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've noticed it here in America, here in Michigan, that the average person's awareness of Japanese culture and history is very much related to their perception through media. Japanese movies, or especially video games, are really affecting our awareness of what Japan and Japanese sword fighting and warriors are like. And unfortunately, the Western world has gone through, or is currently going through, this just tourist history fandom of Japan, trying kind of making up our own history and our own culture, especially, and what's especially important that the awareness of Japanese culture and history is not doing is the separation of culture on the timeline. If someone goes to the United States and you say, well, what's the difference between America and World War II and America and the Revolutionary War? There's a clear difference. But if you talk to someone, say, what's the difference between Japan during the imperial era and the Russo-Japanese War versus the Sengoku Jidai and the siege of Osaka, they won't know. They'll just say, oh yeah, honor and tradition and loyalty, and things like Bushido, not being aware that a lot of those things are a more modern creation that weren't around or weren't prevalent during the Warring States period. So come into this with a flat, clean slate with your knowledge. And then same thing goes for the traditional Japanese sword fighting. A lot of those things have continued over time. And I know a lot of people would be coming into the historical Japanese sword fighting because they're trying to create the best sword fighting style, trying to fuse and pick and choose techniques from this style or this style that works best for them, or works best for what they believe to be the best sword fighting style. And I assure you that's not our goal. And so you're not going to find anything like that here. Or if you do, it would be incidental, because our goal with historical Japanese sword fighting is not to be the best sword fighter ever, or to create the most unique system. Our goal is simply recreating a historical style using scholarly sources. And to create a scholarly or research-based style of sword fighting. That's the goal. So come and have that mindset here. And then lastly, HEMA, a lot of the research styles that are good, the reading of primary sources and interpreting techniques as they were written by professional swordsmen, good stuff. But trying to compare techniques like longsword or dusuk or saber, it's not going to work. It's not going to work for this. So just come into it with, there's no connection between longsword and katana, despite what every YouTube channel says. They're separate. They have no connection and no influence, which is a topic I want to make a video on later on. In any case, that's going to be the end of the first one. Come in with a clean slate. Okay? Now here's the second one. The second one is setting up research. That's right. You have to read books. How great is that? So, for example, there are a lot of books that we have. Make sure I'm grabbing the proper ones. These aren't the ones that I wanted. See, this is what I get for recording the video multiple times. Here they are. These are books that will help give you that insight into the era that we're talking about. Not necessarily how to sword fight, but also to set up this world, this world that certainly influenced sword fighting, especially when you get into the more complex sword fighting manuals that we have. It's good to know the world that they were a part of. And these are primary sources, so they're awesome, they're super fun, they're important, and the sources themselves are related to military research, but they're also going to give you that, so they're fun to read, kind of, we'll talk about them. But they're also good as a setup to researching on your own. This one I recommend only if you're familiar with reading scholarly, dry, historical stuff. This book, which is Samurai and the Warrior Culture of Japan, 1471 to 1877, a source book by Thomas Conlon. I recommend it, and it's full of the most boring, dry primary sources. Now, it's good because we don't get a lot of primary sources, especially translated mundane documents here in the West. We get big things like how many translations are there of the Book of Five Rings, but the little pieces, the little things, we don't get a lot of that. And this book has that, especially in the era in this book, because it crosses a lot of time, especially in the time of the Warring States period. There's a lot of just little things, little details, little notes. And it's good to help get into the mindset of how these warriors, these bushi, actually fought and why they fought. And maybe we'll go into some detailed accounts later on. This book I recommend exclusively. This is Samurai War Stories. I recommend it for the translated material inside of it, the primary sources inside of it. It's actually 3 different sources, but one of them, incredibly important, the Zohyo Monogatari. It's basically a guidebook for Ashigaru, which are the lower class foot soldiers, the guys who actually did the fighting beneath the samurai in rank. And it's very insightful because it's written from their perspective. They are the guys. It's almost sarcastic. It's almost like, oh, we're the lower ranking guys. Here's how to survive. But it offers a ton of insight on how they lived their lives, what the role of the Ashigaru and the other ranks, lower ranks, were on the battlefield, and their mindset on how to survive. Very insightful. I found it very helpful. And this last one, the 100 Rules of War by Sukahara Bokuden, or translated by Eric Shahan. I got it on Amazon. It's like pretty cheap. And it's literally exactly what it looks like. There are 100-ish rules on each page in here from a surviving Warring States period resource. There is unfortunately one problem, and that is that, yes, we have the original 16th century words here, but then in the 1920s, the guy who's apparently the head of the Kendo Association decided to throw his own insight in there, which is really annoying. So we basically have really insightful information written by and recorded by a general or military leader in the Warring States period, and then a samurai fanboy long after the era of the samurai throw his insight in there. Fortunately, the translator or publisher separated the two, so you get the good stuff from the 16th century and the boring stuff from the 20th century that really has no insight into what we're talking about. Nonetheless, it's a good book. This gave me a lot of insight on a lot of things. Covers horseback, horsemanship, archery, living your life, and of course swords and sword fighting. It actually gave me a lot of insight into Suba and their role on the sword. So that's the second one. Doing research and kind of building your idea or reminding yourself of the era that the sword fighting takes place in. The third rule is to prepare for a lot of hardship, because a lot of these books do not have the very clear-cut stuff that you're looking for. For example, if you are a practitioner of HEMA and you've read any of the Victorian saber manuals, they make sense. They click. They're written for the average soldier. They're written to make sense. Good. You pretty much know how to do it. A few little questions here and there, but you get the idea. You even get a similar ability of understanding when you read late Renaissance stuff. Johann Meyer is the iconic example. There's a lot of things in there that just wish we had more clarification, but you understand what they're going for, and the translations kind of make sense. That's not the case with almost any of our primary source manuals from Japan. Whether it's because Japanese language doesn't, or medieval Japanese does not translate well to modern English, be it that the translators themselves didn't really have the insight to understand what they were talking about, or just the fact that they weren't familiar with writing things down to transfer the information. Whatever it might be, these books are not as clear-cut as you want. In fact, just to give you an example, I think I mentioned this in the last video, but just to show it, most of the primary sources we have are these. These are just translation, or I'm sorry, these are catalogs of techniques called mokuroku. The mokuroku are basically just images showing this or that technique, and usually in a scroll showing multiple techniques. But it's literally two guys holding swords and the name of the technique. And just to give you an example, you can see this one, two guys holding swords and the name of the technique. This says Samidare, early summer rain. The end. That's it. That's all we have to go on. And it stinks because we really want to know. I want to know how to do the early summer rain technique. How cool is that? Who's doing it? The guy with two wakizashi or the guy with the kantara? You know, how do we perform it? And we just don't know. So there's going to be a lot of disappointment with this. There's going to be a lot of things that just aren't clicking and aren't making sense. So just prepare for that. For example, in this book here, which we might dive into later on, there's a beautiful technique in here that is called Cloudy Village. And Cloudy Village, the description it gave us is, in this technique, you will appear to your opponent as if you are in front of them, but in reality, you're behind them. Oh, cool. It's literally the nothing personal kid teleports behind you of historical techniques. And I thought, that's cool. I still have no idea how to do it, but I still kept that in my mind. I put it like on a shelf and maybe would come back to it later eventually. And lo and behold, I did, because when I did a reread of this and a deeper dive, I found out that there actually is a Cloudy Village technique in this book that actually tells you how to perform the technique. And it's cool because that shows you that the more that you do research, the deeper understanding and the clearer some of the less clear techniques will be. And I think that that's really cool. And it does show that even though there are separate worlds out there in Sengoku Jidai Japan of sword fighting, they still work together. In fact, the author of this book, Yamamoto Kansuke, in another publication basically poo-pooed all of the ryuha, the schools that are popping up in Japan in this era, saying that they're destroying sword fighting and they're only about money. But it just goes to show that one of those manuals that he was poo-pooing helped us understand his book. So it's fun. Just do more research, but prepare for struggles. It's not an easy thing that you can do. Haha. So, and lastly, I do wanted to let you know that there are not a lot of fundamentals. You can read these saber manuals, you can read these broadsword manuals, and they'll give you the basics. They'll give you how the fights will look, how the stances are. But in none of these historical Japanese books are there fundamentals. They all that I've found so far either dive right into the advanced techniques, or just kind of glance over the basics. They don't tell you how to hold your sword. They don't tell you how to hold your body. And sometimes there isn't that fundamentals. There isn't that like, here's this stance. Here's Yagyu's stance. Here's Kansuke's stance. It doesn't have that. Unlike in Western stuff where you're like, oh, I can tell that you're a Meyer practitioner based on how you hold your sword and how you hold your body, or that you're a Hutton practitioner. You can't do that here. Unless you really pull at threads, and just that might go hand in hand with the third recommendation of getting disappointed, but that one specifically deserved its own because you just have to dive right in, because there is no I'm understanding the basics. So with that, I hope that helps. I hope my microphone didn't die when that phone dropped a second ago. So hopefully I'll bring some more details. Hopefully the next video is going to be an actual interpretation of these techniques, but we will see when we get there. Thank you guys, and until next time, see you around.